Most software engineers compare Austria and Switzerland based on salary numbers and headlines. That's why many make expensive relocation mistakes. I know this from my own experience. I emigrated myself and lived in Switzerland. I've dealt with visas, taxes, housing, and the real cost of life. In 2026, Austria is changing the rules in ways that most engineers haven't even noticed yet. Changes that make moving there dramatically easier. And it's something that Switzerland can simply not compete with in all cases. But this doesn't necessarily mean that Austria is always the better choice. In this video, I'll show you exactly when Austria wins, when Switzerland wins, and how to decide what's best for you. In 2026, Austria is significantly simplifying the so-called red card. It's especially attractive for non-EU/EFTA software engineers. Relevant IT experience is often enough, at least to get the visa, and you don't necessarily need to speak German fluently, at least not from a visa perspective. Be aware, many employers will still require it, so you got to be a bit careful with the language requirements, and in the long run, you will probably have to learn German. If we compare Austria to Switzerland here from a pure visa perspective, Switzerland remains much more restrictive in 2026 if you're a non-EU/EFTA national, because Switzerland has fixed quotas, whereas Austria now doesn't have fixed quotas. Now let's talk about quality of life in comparison. If you look at certain rankings, then very often you will see that Zurich and Vienna, the two important cities in Switzerland and Austria, often rank very close together in terms of overall quality of life. The major difference is probably in housing. If you look at the big cities in Switzerland like Zurich, Geneva, and Basel, housing tends to be under real stress, whereas in Vienna and especially in the rest of Austria, I would say housing is a bit more accessible still so far, at least in 2026. But to be fair, in Switzerland, you don't necessarily have to live in the big cities, so you can sort of mitigate this in Switzerland by living a bit outside of the big cities. So in the end, this might not actually be the biggest advantage between these two countries. Now let's talk about the next important factor, your family. If you're single or if you're a couple and you have no kids, I would say usually Switzerland clearly wins. However, if you have kids under 4 years old, this equation can actually change quite a lot. Because if, for example, you have 2 kids or maybe even more under the age of 4 years old and both parents are working, then the financial equation can change a lot because of the difference in daycare pricing in Switzerland versus Austria. So in this case, Austria can have higher purchasing power for you in your specific situation. The main reason here is that daycare, especially full-time daycare, tends to be much more expensive in Switzerland. There are less government subsidies for it compared to Austria, where daycare is less expensive and there's also more subsidies for it. So even if your salary is a bit lower, as long as your kids are under 4 years old, and especially if you have at least 2 in this age range, then even with a low salary, working in Austria can be a better deal if you're already seeing yourself in this scenario and you're wondering how this plays out for your own family or visa situation. Don't just leave it to assumptions. Book a short call with me and we'll map this to your exact setup. The link is down in the description. So now we talked about Austria and when it wins, but you might now ask, so when is actually Switzerland a much better idea to move to? Because in some scenarios, moving to Vienna or anywhere in Austria compared to, let's say, Zurich, Geneva, or somewhere else in Switzerland can actually be a costly mistake and maybe even a longer run mistake in terms of your career. The sweet spot for Switzerland is typically when either you have no kids because you're single, or you're a couple and you have no kids, or all of your kids are already 4 years or older at least, because then they can go to a normal kindergarten, and you aim for higher salary positions, so lead positions or very well paid niches, management positions, and so on. The higher your salary, generally, the more Switzerland makes sense for you. Career growth is another topic where often Switzerland actually wins, because Switzerland has a bigger ecosystem of tech companies. If you look both at bigger tech companies, like Microsoft, Google, Meta, Adobe. They have offices in Switzerland, sometimes even multiple, whereas in Austria, not always. Also, in terms of startups, there is a stronger startup ecosystem in Zurich, but also in Lausanne, as compared to Vienna, where at least in 2026, I would say Austria is still a bit behind or possibly catching up. Also, Switzerland has a really strong presence in terms of all things AI, in terms of robotics. So if you're into that, then also generally Switzerland might be the better choice for you. The leverage might be better in Switzerland for your career growth, but of course it always depends on your specific situation and also your specific industry. Comparing work cultures between the two countries is also really interesting because basically they're close to the Alps, in the mountains, if you will, have similar cultures in general, but the work culture is actually significantly different between most of Austria and Switzerland. Austria values work-life balance, whereas in Switzerland you typically work more hours, you work more like 42 hours versus 40 hours or less in Austria. You definitely work more days because Austria has a couple more holidays, tends to have a bit more vacation. You actually have to, for the higher salary in Switzerland, you actually have to work a bit longer. And there is also a bit more stress in Switzerland that shouldn't be underestimated. Whereas Austria has a bit of a more laid back, more chill culture. Switzerland is more like a work hard, play hard culture, whereas Austria is more of a work-life oriented culture. Another important factor is also job security. In Switzerland, you don't have much job security. It's not quite as extreme as in the United States, but the job security is much lower than in most European countries. So notice periods, for example, they tend to be shorter, especially in your first year. You can be fired for no reason at any time, pretty much, like under the notice period. Whereas in some other European countries, especially in Austria, the employer actually has to give a reason. So you have a much higher job security in Austria versus Switzerland. So overall, if you want kind of the European version of the US style work culture, work hard, play hard, lots of expectations, but also higher rewards and higher salary, then Switzerland is probably the closest thing you can find, whereas Austria in that sense is distinctly different. Most engineers make the mistake of deciding emotionally. And that's normal. We're all humans, it's okay. But if you want to improve, then don't be like most engineers. Actually do the math, do the homework, and do the exact analysis. What is best for you in your next few years, in your personal motivation, situation, family situation, and everything. Don't just follow what other people recommend based on superficial observations. Because in the longer run, such mistakes can be really costly. It's not like moving to just any European country or any country in the world will unilaterally be your ticket for better life, more money, and everything. You have to do the exact homework. So generally, it can make a lot of sense to be moving to Austria if you're looking for a more chill life versus the work hard, play hard style. If you have, I would say, 2 or even more children under 4 years old who will probably need full-time daycare, because full-time daycare in Austria is comparatively inexpensive. Also, if both parents work full-time, mainly because they want to, not so much because they have to. If you value work-life balance over getting ahead in your career, be it now or generally in life. Or if you're a non-EU/EFTA citizen and you find it hard to get a visa for Switzerland, then Austria can also be the easier country to enter. Or if you're bootstrapping your own business without any external investor money, Austria can also be easier simply because the cost of living is lower and you wouldn't benefit from the tax benefits anyway so much in your first year. Be careful though, because there is an exit tax from Austria, so this could actually backfire as well if you're not careful. And generally, if you prefer Eastern European culture more over Western European culture, Austria can also be a good choice because it is strongly linked to Eastern European culture more than Switzerland, for example. Now, when should you choose Switzerland instead? Generally, if you like to work hard and play hard, Switzerland is probably one of your best choices globally and typically beats Austria. Maybe you're single or you're a couple, but you have no kids and also both of you work and have a relatively high salary. In all these cases, you will benefit from the lower taxes in Switzerland, and you will not have issues with daycare because you don't need it. Alternatively, if all your children are already older than 4 years, then they can already go to kindergarten or school, which is just funded by taxes normally that you would pay anyways. So also in this case, Switzerland might be the better choice. Generally, if you're a high performer aiming and achieving higher salaries, Switzerland tends to be the better choice. Also, if one parent ends up staying with the kids a lot and you're not sending your kids to daycare at all or only very little, mostly because you want to, not so much because you have to, this is a factor that points more towards Switzerland versus Austria. If you speak French or Italian, that's also a clear distinction because neither of these languages is an official or dominant language anywhere in Austria. Whereas in Switzerland, you have the west of Switzerland where French is spoken, or you have this small area called Ticino in the southeast where Italian is spoken. So even though they're a bit smaller, you can find parts of Switzerland where these are the dominant languages, whereas in Austria, German is the only dominant language. Generally, if you value career growth more than work-life balance, Switzerland is probably the better choice for you. And here comes a really smart play. In my opinion, it makes a lot of sense not to marry any country. You might move to Austria first or Switzerland first, and then a couple of years later, a completely different country might make much more sense for you because your requirements have changed. So just for example, you might move to Switzerland for a couple of years as a single, and then maybe as a family you might want to move to Austria for a couple of years after that. And then you could still move back to Switzerland once you assume some leadership or management positions, or your children are over 4 years old. The reasons and the variations are many, and the most important is that you customize it to your individual situation and don't follow superficial recommendations you will find anywhere on the internet. Optimize for your current life stage and not just ideology or somebody else's dreams. As you've seen, there is no universally perfect country for every possible scenario. Austria and Switzerland reward completely different life stages and motivations. The real mistake isn't choosing the wrong country. It's choosing without mapping your decisions to visas, income, family, costs, and long-term leverage. If you want to apply this framework to your own situation instead of guessing, we can do that together. In a call, we will look at where you are right now, what your next 2 to 5 years should optimize for, and which move actually supports that. If that sounds useful, book a call with me using the link in the description. If you have questions, please leave them down in the comments, and see you in the next video.